Everyone, and welcome to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns. I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm excited to tell you the story that I thought I started telling you yesterday, but it turned out I was telling a completely different story. That reminds me of you see in like movies. I mean, I guess this actually happens in like rock and roll tours and stuff like that, right? Where the singer will be like, "All right, thank you, Cleveland," and "Oh, we're in Milwaukee, sorry," like. It was that kind of vibe where I was like, uh-oh, I just, it's like just found myself just naked and alone up here. But anyway, let me tell you this story because this is really, really valuable, okay? Especially when it comes to our relationships. All right, so the other day, my dear, wonderful wife, she made a mistake. Okay. And it was a mistake that was honest, and it was a mistake that was natural, and it was a mistake that was in all good intention. Right. And there was nothing to hide, no, duplicity, no deception. It was simply a decision that was made that was not an appropriate decision. Okay. Let's just leave it at that. The details are not really that important. Okay. But what is important is that the decision that she made, right, impacted several different areas of our lives and our relationship. And this is something that happens with almost all the decisions we make, right? There's very few decisions we make that live inside this vacuum, right? That don't impact the rest of our lives, right? And this decision was no different. Okay, so this decision had an impact on our finances. It had, she bought something that we weren't really in a position to buy and that kind of thing, right? So it impacted our finances. It impacted our ability to, manage certain bills and avoid certain late fees and that kind of stuff. And it also impacted our schedule, in terms of the schedule of the children and need for childcare, which we really don't have access to, and all this kind of stuff, right? And so here's the thing, right? The decision itself is made in an instant, right? Boom. I just made the decision and I took some action on that decision. That decision, literally in an instant. The whole action probably took her maybe, let's say, 10 minutes to do, right? It was buying an airline ticket. I guess I might as well just tell you the details. So she must travel to Canada. Her father, sadly, is in hospice care. And so they just opened the border to Canada. So she's trying to get up there to see him. It's tragic and it's sad and everything, but anyway, I don't want to get, it's her thing. I don't want to talk too much about it, right? My stuff I talk, but it's not my stuff. But anyway, so she bought this airline ticket, right? And it's the kind of thing where like she's going to be reimbursed by her family and that kind of thing. And so it's like, we're all good. Like it's going to be okay in the end, right? But it really wasn't a great time to buy that ticket on Wednesday night when she did it, right? Like it caused this rippling effect of all this stuff. And that's the point, is that it's a rippling effect, right? And if you look at ripples, right, they're happening over a space, but also time, right? And that's the thing. When we make a decision, right, the implications of that decision and the sort of, if you will, fallout of that decision are going to be made known over a period of time. Now, sometimes that time is very quick, right? If a house is burning down, but even that, right? Even if you see something that's like, like a burning house, right? Like, yes, immediately you're going to realize that all the belongings are gone and all this and all that and all that. But then you're going to soon realize that, oh my gosh, I got to reapply for, a social security card or a, birth certificate. Like I didn't even think that was in the fire too, that kind of stuff that you might not realize for years later. Right. And so what happened the other night with our decision was that with the decision that my wife made and our conflict from that decision is that I started to realize all these other things like, oh yeah, and then there's also this thing, and then, oh man, and now I can't do that. And this kind of, unfolds over a period of time. And for our situation, it wound up being over maybe about, an overnight period, right? Like we first had the discussion at like 7:00 in the evening, 8:00 in the evening. And then by the next day I was, by 10 a.m. I was realizing the last of the things, right? So something like that. So it didn't go on for days and weeks, which is good, which was advantageous for us because it allowed us to see this thing that I'm talking about here, right? Because this is really, really important. So heads up here. Okay. in the past, especially for me, and now this, of course, arises from my own trauma of, my parents were, the first thing that they did was to assign blame for a situation, right? It wasn't about, dealing with the situation. It was about letting you know that you're the one who messed this up, right? Now, again, they got that from their parents. Their parents probably got it from their parents, and on and on and on and on. So it's not, I've forgiven everybody. It's not like that, but that's the reality, right? And that's my nervous system. That's the way that I process things. And many of you out there might have similar sort of, aspects of your nervous system, which are ways and, sort of tendencies and habits that you've picked up from your parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents and so on and so on and so on, right? It might not be exactly like mine, but I'm sure that somehow they fit this same pattern, right? Because I don't think I'm alone here. Right. And what would happen in the past is that every time I realized, like, okay, first the initial thing was like, oh crap, you really that money, I had that money set for paying these bills, and I already paid these couple of bills, so I don't know if we even had enough in the account for what you just spent. And then so there's that. Now, a little while later, we find out that in fact the bank account is overdrawn. And then we think a little bit ahead and we realize that, oh crap, there's these other bills that need to be paid too. And then we go ahead and then I realized the next morning, I said, oh, well, but wait a minute, the date that you decide to go, that's the date that I have this other thing. And so we're going to have to find a babysitter. Like, so each one of those things, and there was a couple others in between, but each one of those realizations, right, in the past would have been another sort of opportunity, basically another conflict. It would have been a little mini argument. And each one of those, I would have said, you see, this also, blah, 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 right? But the thing is, pardon me while I take a sip of my delicious Yogi vanilla spice perfect energy tea. Still not getting any money from them, but hopefully someday. And then the decisions my wife makes might be less impactful. But anyway, the thing is that I come from, and this is also in fairness, just a little side note here, that, just to let you know financially what I'm talking about here is that my wife and I come from a place of, we used to both make, well over $100,000 a year, so it was like money was like whatever, we just always had money to throw at a plane ticket or whatever. Well, doing this kind of work is not so lucrative. I got paid very, very well to sell tobacco products to people, right? But saving people is a lot less lucrative, apparently. So anyway, that's the reason. It's not like we're poor and broke and dying here, but things are tight. We're basically just making it by. And so a $700, $800, whopper of a bill is like, oh, like I didn't know. Anyway, so in the past, each one of those realizations, right? Like when I realized that, oh, but then we have to pay this payment and that payment, and each one of those would have been another opportunity for me to say, you see what a horrible thing you did, right? But again, that's not fair, right? Because it's all coming from one single decision, one single mistake, one single flaw, one single drop of the ball, one single F up. But it is one single F up. And so to blame someone over and over and over for the same thing is, that's borderline lunacy. Like that's how could we do that to each other? And how can we do that to ourselves is another question, right? Because we do, right? If you make a single decision in the morning that ripples out throughout your day, every time you find that thing, every time you feel that thing, every time you recognize the mistake that you made, you're going to blame yourself a little more. You're going to beat on yourself a little bit more. Now, I don't know if it comes across as a physical thing like I just did. And again, that's what I learned, right? So maybe you have more of maybe it's more of a shame kind of feeling rather than an anger feeling, right? Like I don't feel a lot of shame, That's not a thing for me. But anger is a thing for me. I get angry at myself. I get raw. What the F is wrong with you? Not outside, internally. And so this is the thing, right? Like when we're beating ourselves up over it, right? Then, or beating each other up over it, right? What we're actually doing is we're closing down any opportunity for growth and healing, right? Because we're putting each other into, or either ourselves or our partners, we're putting them into the stress response, right? Because the minute somebody feels attacked, whether it's you're attacking yourself with the God, what's the matter with you, or you're attacking the other person, it's like, you see everything, I'm going to point out every single consequence to this single decision you made. Every time we do that, we put the other person or ourselves into the stress response. And in the stress response, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're just surviving. And that's the way it works, right? And so what's the solution here? It's the F word, forgiveness. That's what it is, right? We got to forgive that somebody just made a mistake. And yes, there's going to be fallout. There's going to be ramifications. There's going to be consequences. But if I can forgive the person, whether that person is myself or my partner, a colleague, an associate, just a stranger out in the world, if I can forgive them, then it allows me to see the reality, the accurate reality of what's really happening, right? That these are not 4, 5 different things for me to beat somebody else up over, but they're just 4 or 5 manifestations of the same one thing that I already addressed with them. So there's no need to keep going, because in keep going, what we're doing is we're pushing each other away from each other. We're again, closing down communication. We're closing down healing. We're closing down understanding. We're closing down harmony. We're closing down flow. And you know what this means is that we're growing further and further and further apart from each other, not closer and closer and closer and closer to each other. And that also applies to ourselves. We're moving further and further and further away from that inner nobility, that beautiful authenticity that we all have. Every time we beat ourselves up over a single mistake that has many different ramifications, each time we beat ourselves up over each one of those single ramifications, we are moving further and further away from connection to that authenticity. And that authenticity, by the way, happens to be one of the greatest tools you have to live in this world in which we find ourselves. The most beautiful part of it is that the forgiveness F word is as easy and natural as the other F word. Perhaps even more so. Because it comes naturally. It really does. It's just forgiveness is it's just a letting go, right? It's not a big deal. It's not a big sort of ceremonial thing. It's not something where you have to contact the person you're forgiving and let them know you've forgiven them and throw yourself at their mercy and do some kind of penance or anything like that. It's not what it is. It's not at all what it is. Forgiveness is just putting down the load that you're carrying. To say that, Jack Kornfield put it the best, I think, right, in his book called The Wise Heart, and I think he's mentioned this otherwise, but Jack says that forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. And forgiveness allows us to laugh at it, allows us to see the folly of how, oh my gosh, look what I used to do. It's so silly. Now, in the past, I would have beaten myself up for beating myself up over the time, all the time, right? It just beat up, mash myself into the ground, just over and over and over and over. And then I wonder why I have anger issues. And then I wonder why I'm in such a messy place in my life. And that's another thing, as I told you, my income level and stuff, back then I was like way more of a mess with everything. I mean, I had plenty of money, so there was always enough money to throw at the person that was demanding it the loudest. But I was a mess back then as far as it was, I was just, I made all that money, but I still at the end of the month had nothing to show for it, basically. Right? I mean, that's how bad it was. Now, of course, we had, substance abuse issues and all kinds of other things that tie into this. So it's not a normal situation at all. But But yeah, I mean, it's really in forgiving myself and in working on myself. I'm living on literally, I mean, we are living on literally less than 25% of what we used to live on. And we're happier now. And we're more comfortable now. We're more cozy and healthy now than we were then. And forgiveness has a lot to do with it. And so, how do you practice forgiveness? You first start very, very small, very small. Okay. You forgive the person who dropped a gum wrapper on the sidewalk. You forgive the person who, even if that didn't bother you before, notice the gum wrapper, feel your resentment for the gum wrapper and then forgive it, right? Forgive the person who cuts in front of you in traffic. Forgive the person who, the person who took your order wrong at Starbucks or something like that. Forgive the little things. Forgive yourself for the little things. Forgive yourself for not calling that friend like you said you were going to. Forgive yourself for not, sending in the bill before a certain date. Forgive yourself for these little things. And again, start small. And over time, as you keep forgiving yourself in these little ways, you'll start forgiving some of the bigger stuff too. And that's where the magic happens. All right, everybody. I'll see you in the next segment. Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back to segment number 2 on this Friday, November 12th. I'm really happy to be here with you still and again. I hope you enjoyed that last segment. I'm feeling like my motor's getting warmed up here, and so I wanted to talk about something else that happened. I swear I told you in the last segment I actually stopped after like 2-3 minutes and I started over because I was telling this story and I was like, wait a minute, this seems too familiar, and I don't know if I've told you this story. Now, this is like, there are moments in my life where I feel like I'm speaking of the movies from the last episode, from the last segment. There are moments in my life where I feel like I am the guy from Memento. If you've never seen that movie, it's a fascinating movie. It's about a guy who has a damage. I believe it's to his hippocampus. I have to watch it now that I know the neuroscience. I haven't watched it in many years before I studied neuroscience and neuroanatomy. But he could not form short-term memory, right? He could not form new memories. And so sometimes I feel that way because I'm doing these podcasts and YouTube channel. I'm doing, I do TikTok videos, and then I also talk about this kind of stuff with my clients. So a lot of times I'm telling a story, I'm like, wait a second, have I been here before? And it's such a confusing thing. But again, it's interesting. It's not bad. It's not good. It's interesting. And so I hope that you find it interesting that I may be telling you this story again. I mean, it's an important story, I think. And so I want you to hear it. And not the details of there actually are no details to the actual story, but the moral of the story is really, really important. So the other morning, I was Wednesday morning, and this was a day where I did not record, and I already gave you my mea culpa about that. I had a tremendous trauma trigger, and a big one, like a big one. I was sobbing. And now again, I think I did mention it when I was telling you this the other day. So the trigger for this, and I'm talking sobbing, like wailing, like crying like a baby. Literally. It might be hard for you to picture that. This is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month in November here. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about my own issues of mental health, because I think part of the problem, or one of the challenges of human beings, or sorry, not human beings, but men in our society, is that we don't talk about our mental health very much. We tend to, the role of the man in our society is, man up, rub some dirt on it, suck it up, all that kind of stuff, and we're meant to be the strong ones in the nuclear family, right? Like that's just the way it is, but society itself, which again is something we're going to be covering in the new course that's coming out in about a week from now. Society itself, drives men into a very sort of austere and ascetic kind of place, right? That we're not, we're not encouraged. There's not an outlet for us to talk about our mental health. right? And that's part of the problem. I really think it is. And that's something actually, I've been very open with my own trauma here. And one of the things that happened a couple of weeks ago, and this is really fascinating. I have not shared this with you, but one of the things that happened a couple of weeks ago is that I I've been struggling and struggling on how to have a conversation with my wife about my trauma and to let her in on some of this stuff that I'm learning about myself. And what I realized was that it's so hard to talk about because I never was able to talk about it before. Like I never had the outlet. So therefore, it's just really, not that it's hard in the sense of like, oh man, it feels uncomfortable to talk about myself. That's not what I mean. I mean, just like, I don't know how to do it. Like it's like asking me to go juggle. Like I've never juggled before. I'll try, but I don't know how to do it. Right. So I'm not going to get up there in front of 50 people and try to juggle. Right. I mean, I'll go in my bedroom and try it a couple of times first, And so talking to, and the ironic thing is that, and this was my point, right, is that for the 20 some odd years that I've been with my wife, we first started dating in 1999. And so for 22 years now, right, over the course of those 22 years, we have literally had hundreds of conversations about her mental health, issues that she's experienced from her childhood and her trauma and all of the things that, that she's endured, right? And all this time, I literally thought that I was the one that had it easier. Like I thought she had the harder childhood. And that's the thing about, childhood abuse, especially, abuse isn't always easy to name, right? And sometimes abuse just feels like normal, and that's the thing, right? But as a man, I think my role was that of the supporter, right? And so anyway, the other night I finally just, we just tumbled into the conversation somehow, and I started talking about it, and like once I started talking about it, like I couldn't stop talking about it, which felt great. But literally, I don't think I got 5 minutes into the 40-minute conversation that I had about it, and my wife was sobbing, like she was crying, like she had just lost her own child. Like she was just weeping for the way that, the young child, and of course, because we have a son that's like exactly like what I was, So when I'm telling her about the things that I lived with, which I shared a few things here, but it's come into much clearer detail the more that I've worked on it these last few months. But but when I tell her things that I'm going through, it's like she's seeing her son go through it, and that's hard, and so yeah, we got to start talking about ourselves, men. We really do, and. I'm always very, very careful I'm always very careful to be very honest and upfront about this. I am not a trained or licensed psychologist, therapist, counselor, social worker, psychiatrist. I'm none of that. Okay. But I am someone who can listen. And so if you are struggling, whether you're a man or a woman, you don't have to be a man for this, but we're highlighting that this month because November is, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And so if you're a man or a woman and you feel like you don't have anybody to talk to, I know what that feels like. And I'm going to tell you right now that when I opened up and told my story the other night, it was like a 5-ton weight was pulled off my shoulders or off my chest. I felt like I could finally breathe. It's hard to describe how good it felt, how relieved, how beautifully just it felt to get it off my chest. And so if you're someone who doesn't know how to talk about it, and if you're someone who's just confused and reluctant and just, wrapped up in it, and you don't even know how to start the conversation, well, start the conversation with me. I'll ask you a question that will start it, okay? I'll help you with that. And then all you got to do is talk. And we can do it like this on a video. We can do it on a phone. If you're in Denver, we can meet up for a cup of tea, okay? So anyway, in the 6 minutes that I have left, let me talk about what I was set out to talk about in this episode. It's fine because it really doesn't take that much more than a few minutes. Um, there's a really important aspect of how we relate to each other, right? In terms of our own like interpersonal conflict, if you will. And so what I mean by that, the other morning, my wife and so my wife and my daughter have this arrangement that my daughter and I know I told you some of this. My daughter wakes my wife up at like 6:30 in the morning so that they can go like to the store and kind of hang out a little bit in the morning before my wife goes to work. Right? It's beautiful. And so the other morning. And seriously, this is an interaction that probably 99.9% of people would not even have noticed what happened, right? And there are hundreds of other interactions that my wife has had with my daughter, with me next to them, that I wouldn't have even noticed, right? But there was something about this one. There was something about the way that my wife was not responsive to my daughter, right? That just triggered me. It just triggered me. And again, it didn't trigger me as a almost 53-year-old man with lots of support, resources and stuff like that. It triggered the 5-year-old child in me, right? Who had that issue with my parents, right? And so here's the thing, and I know I told you all this the other day, so I'm not going to go through all the details again, but here's the important thing about this, okay? Actually, it's not even that story. I can't believe it. I'm telling you the wrong darn story. Wow, that's funny. That is funny. All right, well, I'm not going to start over at this point. So you know what? Okay, I'm going to share the story that I was going to share today. I'm going to share that one tomorrow, okay? I can't believe this happened. That's so funny. Again, this is the entertainment, right? I just made the biggest mess up on a podcast that anybody could make. And yet, I'm laughing, right? And that's what we got to do with life. So let me spend the next couple of minutes telling you more about this course that I'm going to be going through in a week. And I promise you I'm going to tell you this other story tomorrow. And it is very important. But let's talk about this course, okay? Because we only do have a couple minutes left here. So, and it really wouldn't have given the other story enough credit, enough time and honor. So we're going to do that tomorrow for a full 15-minute segment. I really am sorry about that. But this course, okay, so, you hear me talk a lot about how, society, kind of trains us to do things, and the school system trains us to do things, and, advertising and, all this stuff, right? There's also the reality that, part of what I was, one of the things that I've come to realize in my own mindfulness journey, and one of the things I was thinking about as I was, kind of making notes about this course is that, if you go back, say, 50 years, right? Like when I was a kid, right? And this is not, this is like empirical data, right? There's this historical record, right? That we know that someone who had even whatever full-time job you had, right? If you had one full-time job, and only one parent in a family has a full-time job, then generally speaking, that family has enough money to afford a house, clothes, food, and a modest vacation every year, right? Like that's the 50s, 60s, and 70s, model of America, right? That's not true anymore. Okay, that is not true anymore. I mentioned to you in the last segment that 77% of American adults live from paycheck to paycheck. The same amount of people, the same percentage of the population who reportedly experiences chronic stress, which is an interesting correlation, and I think probably a causation. And so the idea here is that, the world is not what we've been led to believe it is, right? And there are forces at play here that are making things happen, especially in America, that are making things very, very difficult. And the stakes are higher, right? People are getting evicted from their homes. People are being foreclosed on their homes. And so when we turn on the news and we turn on social media and even some of the entertainment that we watch, we're seeing all this over and over and over, and we're seeing the violence in the world, and we're seeing it. But again, this is not a mistake that we're only seeing these aspects, right? This is engineered, right? They want us to see, they want us to be scared, because what do scared people do? They buy shit, right? And that's what they want. They want you to buy shit, because that's what matters in this world. And so we're going to take a look at that in this new course. And I'm going to give you now here's the thing. It's not about bypassing that. A lot of spiritual courses that you'll come across if you're looking will say things like, just get rid of negative energy, only experience positive emotions, let go of anger. Anger doesn't belong, and all this kind of stuff, right? And what that is, that's a bypass. That's an escape, right? And so you can't escape society, right? You can't escape the world, right? And so instead of escaping, what we're going to be doing in this 8-week course is we're going to be talking about coping, and we're going to be talking about understanding, and we're going to be talking about becoming really aware of what's going on, and specifically the sort of machinations behind the scenes that are at play that show that this stuff is not just accidental, right? It's not just a fluke that we're in this position. And so anyway, it's going to have some, current affairs kind of thing. It's going to involve a lot of critical thinking about current affairs and politics and stuff. It's going to, yes, include compassion and some forgiveness, but most of all, it's going to be awareness, non-judging awareness. And I've got some great practices, some great lectures, and I'm really, really excited about this course. So if you're interested, again, the early bird pricing is good for the next 2 days, okay? And on Monday, it's going to go up to the regular price. So if you're interested in saving $20 or $22, you can do that today. And for the next couple of days. All right. I do have a like sort of a description page that I'm going to put out in today's email. So you'll see a link to that below. But yeah, let me know if you want to sign up, because I'd love to have you in this course. Okay. So listen, I'm going to go now. We're at the end of our time. I'm really sorry about this second segment. It felt so clunky. My gosh, I haven't had one of those in a long time. But again, let's accept it. Let's laugh at it. And let's just know that it's not that serious, and it's okay. All right, everybody. Have a great day. I wish you well. I'll be back in tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.